Hello everyone and welcome to another HSMA solutions video. Now this time we are going to be going through the solution to exercise 2 of Python session 1E. That was the first Python programming session. Now if you haven't followed the previous video, your VS Code might not look quite like this. If you would like it to, then I would recommend you head back to the previous video in this series, and we will go through downloading the GitHub repository where all of the code exercises for this session are stored, and opening it up in VS Code in such a way that all of the exercise content is available in this nice little sidebar. You can also follow along using Google Colab. If you head to the repository link, which is linked in the video description, then you will be able to open up this exercise notebook in Google Colab, which is a free online coding platform. All you need is a free Google account, and you will be able to do all of the coding exactly as we do here. We just teach in VS Code because it's what we teach on the HSMA course. It is great for coding locally on your machine. It's a very powerful development environment. So, all that said, let's kick off going through exercise 2. Now, this time, in our previous exercise, we had to create the Python notebook ourselves, the Jupyter notebook even. This time, nicely, we already have a notebook. So all I have done is click on it here and opened it up. Now, what we've got are, by the looks of it, a couple of code cells, and so each one of these is a code cell we can write something in, or we could edit this one. And we've got a couple of blocks of markdown text. Now, let's take a look at the first task. We have been asked to, well, I'm going to double click to open up the markdown cell. And what I'm going to do is, while I'm here and reading through, I'm going to break this up into a few steps that we can more easily follow. So we have been asked to write code that asks the user to input their monthly take-home, housing costs, food costs and utility costs, calculate the remaining amount of their take-home after housing, food and utility costs have been deducted, as well as the percentage of their monthly take-home that is eaten up by housing costs. Finally, we want to print a message to the user telling them what their monthly remaining amount is after housing, food and utility costs. And put this as a subtask. So what I'm doing here, I should have explained this at the start. These little hyphens are a signal to mark down that we want a bulleted list. So if I now click tick here, you can see that we've got a bulleted list that just breaks down the steps that we are going to try and achieve here a little bit more clearly. If I go back to edit, so when I hover over the cell, I can move between the edit mode and the stop editing mode of markdown. And I'm also going to just move that one there. We should also be including comments in our code to explain what everything does. So now we've got a slightly clearer step-by-step of what we need to be producing in our little coding program. The other thing here is Dan has given us a nice example of how we can split long print statements into multiple lines. So let's see what happens when we run this. Oh, and I will just need to choose my base environment in Jupyter here. So nicely, when I've clicked this, it's come up with select kernel. It's already got base for me because that was the last environment I used. Or I could also choose select another kernel, Python environments, and then choose any environment from my list of environments on my machine. But I'm going to stick with base this time. So I'm going to click on that, and you can see now at the top right, our machine says that our Jupyter Notebook says that we are using the base environment Anaconda. So let's go back to our cell, and we can see that we've actually, even though this is all split up over 3 lines here, we've just got one continuous print statement here. We've got one continuous output, and I've got the little line in my code cells and in my general Python editor that shows me that this is 80 characters, and I would ideally not go past that. This is the PEP 8 guidance, which I will link in the video description as well. It's just a bit of a style guide for how people would recommend you write Python to make it readable, and generally if everyone's using that, it makes everyone else's code more readable to you as well. So we've got a nice code cell here where we can start writing our own input. Now, I'm going to create some space for a couple of different variables. I want monthly take home, press equals, and I'm going to, even though we're getting an error here because we haven't actually defined what this variable is yet, that's fine. I'm going to come back and do that in a second, but I'm just going to set up all of my variables first. So housing costs, food costs, and utility costs. Now, what I'm going to do is, I know that when I ask Python for an input, so what is your monthly take home pay? If I run this now and ask and get my get the monthly take home pay, even if the user enters it as a number, as we would expect them to, what we're going to find is that actually it is interpreted by the input function as a string, as a bit of text. And the problem with a bit of text is you can't do maths with it, which is not what we want here because we need to be doing some calculations in a moment. Now, I have two options here. I could, like in our previous exercise, use int around this. And this would allow me to, this would basically, anytime a user enters a number, then it will turn it into an integer number, a whole number that Python recognises as something it can do maths with. This is all right, but actually if our user enters something with decimal points, then the integer is just going to cut those off. It's going to truncate them, it's going to completely ignore them. So if someone enters £551.23, it's just going to go, oh, 551, £551. We're going to lose that precision. This wasn't a problem in the previous exercise because all we were asking for was someone's age, and we could fairly legitimately expect them to enter that as a whole number. But this time I'm going to use what is called a float. Now, a float just means decimal number. That's all it is, really. It just means that when we enter it, we don't lose that anything after the decimal places. Now, just to save a bit of time, I've highlighted all of this. Actually, I'm just going to highlight up to the float bit, and I'm going to right click and choose copy. And I'm just going to paste this to the next three because effectively we want the same thing each time. All we want to do is ask for the user. So this within the brackets here of input, this is just what the user will see. What it tells them what we want them to enter. So this time we just want, what are your monthly housing costs? Monthly food costs, and what are your monthly utility costs? Now, just so we can see the output of that, I'm going to print each of these, the first two, just so we can see what we get out of this. I've made a new code cell here, so you can see when I hover over the bottom of the code cell, I get the option to add a new code cell or a new markdown cell. We could do this all in one cell, there'd be nothing wrong with that, but it's just a little bit easier to break it down. So let's execute this cell, and you can see at the very top of the screen here, we're being asked what's our monthly take-home pay, so let's stick with 551.30. Housing costs, £23. Monthly food costs, £43.50, and monthly utility costs. Don't we all wish that was how it was, apart from the take-home pay? Anyway, so monthly take-home and housing costs. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to print these out by executing this cell. So you can see what we've got now are 551.3 and 23.1. Now, just to illustrate what I was saying about the about these being numbers so that we can actually do something with them, I'm going to print monthly take home times housing costs. And you can see that even though we have a slightly odd number of decimal points here, what we do have is an output that is two numbers being multiplied together. If I went back through this and did it again and got rid of the float, we would get an error because it would be trying to multiply a string with a string and it wouldn't have a clue what to do, or we'd get some nonsense. I can never quite remember which Python prefers in this case. I think it will just say you can't multiply a string with a string. I have no idea what you're asking me to do. So what have we done? We've got the first step here. Then we need to calculate the remaining amount of their take-home after housing, food and utility costs have been deducted. I'm going to stay in this code cell. That just makes my life a little bit easier, because otherwise if I put it all in the same one, every time I wanted to run my code again, I would have to enter some more sample numbers into the into the input boxes. And as you can tell, I'm not very good at making up numbers on the spot. So let's calculate remaining money. We could call that whatever we wanted, but effectively we want our monthly take-home pay. We want to subtract our housing costs, we want to subtract our food costs, and we want to subtract our utility costs. Now, you might have noticed I'm not typing in the whole thing here. Now, in VS Code, when I start typing something that I have already defined, it will give it to me as an option for autocomplete, which can really speed up your coding. So see here, all I had to get as far as was actually you. I just typed a few more letters because we might have a couple of options here. The one that is highlighted in blue is going to be the one that is selected if we press enter. So if I now press enter, you can see that what happens is we suddenly have utility costs. Saves us a bit of typing, will really speed up your coding in the long run. So I'm going to print remaining money and just check that that's vaguely sensible. And we do have a little bit of money left over. That's nice. That wouldn't actually be a given. We haven't sort of prevented that from being the case in any way. But I think that is the correct thing to have here. So what did we have? Yep, monthly take home. So I think that's all good. Now what we're going to do next is calculate the percentage of our take home that represents. And actually, while we're at it, let's start adding in some comments. So if you remember, we start a line with a hash. That tells Python we don't want to run this line. It's just a note to ourselves or to anyone else who comes after you and looks at your code. This person is very often you in 6 months' time, and you will be eternally grateful to yourself for writing comments. Now, the thing about comments and writing them is that, well, you don't want to write them for absolutely everything. It starts getting a little bit over the top. When you start out, you will not know where that line is, really. It will take a little while to work out what comments are useful and what aren't. The other thing, though, is to be clever with your variable names. So we could have called these, instead of monthly take home, housing costs, food costs, utility costs, could have called them A, B, C, and D, or amount 1, amount 2, amount 3, and that would have all worked fine, but it would have been significantly less readable. So using your variable names well is a great step towards not having to write as many comments. And actually you can start to assume to a certain extent that people will be familiar with very common sort of common inputs, common functions of Python, common ways that common features of Python. So, for example, I don't have to sit here and after every line or before every line write get the user's monthly take home, get the user's housing costs. You can do that if it would be useful to you to remember that. If you would find that helpful, then that is absolutely fine, and no one is going to say you can't do that. But you might find that it's just a little bit more effort than it's worth. So what I'm trying to say is comments are a very personal thing, and just find what works for you, but you probably want at least some in there. So what I'm going to do here is even though we've been quite expressive with our variable name, I'm still going to go calculate how much money the user has left month. And just to demonstrate, I'm going to run this again, and you can see that, I got rid of our print statement, so I'm going to print remaining money. And you can see that actually calculate how much money the user has left at the end of the month. It hasn't printed that, hasn't done anything with that. It's completely ignored by Python, which is very handy. So next thing we need to do in our list of tasks is calculate the percentage of the monthly take home that is eaten up by housing costs, just housing costs. Okay, so what I'm going to do is percentage take home housing. Now this is getting a little bit long for a variable name, to be honest. You can see that actually we've used probably nearly a third of our width of our screen just with this variable name. So maybe I'll just call it perk for now. That's probably clear enough. Again, this is all quite subjective. You'll get your own habits for writing variable names over time. There is some guidance out there, a little bit, it's a bit loose, so don't worry too much about it. Again, use what makes sense for you and makes it easier to follow what you're doing. So percentage of take-home housing, that is just going to be our housing costs divided by our monthly take-home. Now, for now, I'm going to go perk take-home housing. I'm going to print that just so that we can see what comes out here. And what we get is actually a decimal. Now this, why is this? Well, all we've done is we've taken our housing costs, divided them by our monthly take home. We haven't formatted it as a percentage in any way at this point. Now we could have done something like this. We could have surrounded it by brackets and said times this by 100. And then we get something that's actually a bit more recognisable. In this case, very unrealistically, our housing costs represent 4% of our monthly take home. That would be really nice. But it is now something that you might recognise as a percentage. But actually, I'm going to show you in a minute a nice, handy way to format something as a percentage without actually having to fiddle with the original value. Now, this can be really handy later down the line if you're able to just, generally I'd recommend when you calculate a percentage, just do this, just take the number you want to divide it by your total, and then leave it as that, because we can modify it elsewhere, and this makes it more flexible for if you turn it into 4 point something, then you might want to use it in a different way later in your code, and actually that just complicates things. Don't worry about it too much for now, but basically we're fine to just go housing cost divided by monthly take home. And if I run this again now, you can see that we're back to our 0.04. So what do we need to do next? Percentage remaining. Finally, print a message to the user telling them what their monthly remaining amount is after housing, food and utility costs, and what percentage of their monthly take home that is housing costs rounded to 2 decimal places. Cool, so I'm going to go print, and I'm going to say your monthly amount remaining after housing, food and utility costs is, oh, and we're getting a little bit close to this line here. So what I'm going to do is, remember in this example, Dan showed us that we can split a print statement onto multiple lines by closing the quotation marks and then putting a comma after it. We stay inside the same set of brackets, but we do this. See, so now I'm going to get our bracket, I'm going to do a couple of extra lines here just to get our brackets out of the way. And what I'm now going to do is I'm going to do an F string, because we need to now effectively insert a little bit of Python. Now, as a reminder, format string is just a way of adding in Python variables, or doing a little bit of something to one of your Python variables within a string print statement. So we just start before our quotation marks, we put this F, which stands for format, and what we will do is, how many pounds have we got remaining? Let's go remaining money. And let's just play this, run this for now. Okay, so we've got 139.599999 remaining. That's all right, but actually, can we do something to this to make it display a little bit nicer for the user? We are now outputting something for the user after all. They're going to see it, and this doesn't look great. Now, format strings have this really nice feature of being able to round for you. Now, if I enter a colon after my variable, and then I type in dot to f, what this means is it's going to format it to 2 decimal places. The dot 2 is 2 decimal places. And you can see now that it has rounded our 59999 to 2.60, which is much better. I could change this to 3, and I would get 600. That's a bit weird because we've got money. Change it to 1, also a bit weird because we've got money, but useful to know you can do any of these. You can also do, I believe, 0.0, and you can see that now has rounded it to no decimal places. The other thing you might notice is we've got a really big space here. It almost looks like 2 spaces. Now, when we link up print statements in this way, it will automatically add spaces after each statement. So if I get rid of that space that I had after is before I close my quotation marks and then execute the cell again, you will see that this time we haven't got that big extra space. We've just got a single space, which is much better. Now, I'm next going to, what was the next thing I need to do? Tell them what their monthly take home is, that is housing costs. Your housing costs represent, I'm just going to leave that empty for now. So I've just put my little curly braces in where I'm going to put my Python of your, I'm going to need a bit of space for my Python in there, so I'm going to start another new line. Monthly housing costs. And this time we're going to do percentage of take-home housing. And actually already you can see I've gone way over, so let's grab this lot and put it at the start of our next line. And therefore we will need to make this a format string as well, otherwise we will get an error. Or actually, we probably won't even get an error, we'll just get Python not actually, I'll show you. If I run this now, you can see it just says your housing costs represent perk take-home housing of your monthly housing costs. Not much use to anyone. If we turn it into a format string, then we actually get our percentage value. And again, we've got this not very nice percentage value. And I believe, well, there's a couple of different ways we can go about this. Let's first try to, I believe this might do it. There we go. So, a couple of different ways we can go about it. You can see in our previous one, oh, actually, let's change this back to 2 decimal places. We had 2 decimal places. We said 0.2f, which means just make me a number, just a standard number that is rounded to 2 decimal places. Instead, we can use 0.2 percentage. And instead of having to faff around multiplying this number by 100 or anything like that, we can just instantly turn it into a percentage that is rounded to 2 decimal places. Now, let's head on to task 2, because I believe we have done everything that we needed to in this one. So task 2, write code that asks the user to input. Let's do this again. Let's break it down. And you see this time I just double clicked, that will just turn this markdown cell into edit mode. Ask the user to input a day number from 1 up to and including 365, and which, assuming day 1 is a Monday, prints out the day of the week corresponding to the user's inputs. So here's a nice example. If the user are asked to were to input 16, the code should print out Tuesday. So Dan has helpfully pointed out that we probably don't want to write to 365 lines of code. That is probably not the most efficient way to do this. Now, what we're going to use is the modulus function. Now, you might remember if you've been watching the videos alongside this, that the modulus function gives you the remainder of a calculation. So let's just demonstrate this. If I do 6 and I want to divide it by 5, so 6 modulus 5, and I'll run this, then I get 1. Now what this means is when you divide 6 by 5, it goes in one time and you have 1 left over. let's try this with 6 divided by 4. So it still only goes in one time, but you have 2 left over. Now, if I divide 6 by 3, I have 0 left over because 3 times 2 is 6. It goes in exactly. We have nothing left over. Or 6 divided by 3 is 2, perfectly. Nothing left over. So 6 divided by 6, again, nothing left over. 6 divided by 2, nothing left over. It goes in exactly. Now, why on earth is this useful to us? Well, what we can do is say, we can think about this as cycling through the weeks of the year. So every time you get to the end of a week, you almost go back to the beginning. So you go, day 1 is a Monday, day 2 is a Tuesday, day 3 is a Wednesday, day 4 is a Thursday, so on and so forth. Day 7 is a Sunday, and then we go back to day 1 is a Monday, day 2 is a Tuesday, day 3 is a Wednesday, and so on. How does this work with modulus? Well, if we divide something by 7, all we get out of our calculation is the remainder. So let's say if we had day 1 of the year, and we'll divide that by 7, what do we get? We get 1. Day 2 of the year, we get 2. Okay, you can see where this is going. So let's say day 1 equals Monday. Now day 8, 1 week on, we get a 1 again. So regardless of whether we put in 1 divided by 7, 8 divided by 7, 8 modulus 7 even, not 8 divided by 7, 8 modulus 7, that's the number that will correspond to the second Monday of the year, assuming Monday was, the day 1 was a Monday. And then let's go 15, so we've added another week on, we still get 1. Now, if I go to day 5 of the week, for example, then that will give us a remainder of 5. And actually, if I go to day 12 of the week, so, or day 12 of the year even, so we've added 7 days on, again, we still get 5. This feels a little bit weird, you might not be getting it yet, but let me write the rest of the code that I'm going to use, and you will see what how this kind of actually maps onto the code. The other thing I would say is that when you start out early Python programming, there are a lot of these exercises like this where you actually have to use some logic. They're more like logic puzzles, and sometimes you'll find that your later programming isn't like that so much. So if you're finding these exercises really hard, if you're finding it really difficult to conceptualize how you would actually go about solving a problem, don't panic. I would say that this is actually something that comes with a little bit of practice. Treat it more as a puzzle with some programming attached. When we come to later code, where we're creating graphs, where we're adding new columns to tables, where we're iterating through a table to pull out data for different groups of patients, for example, it's a little bit different. You will potentially find that a lot easier than this, but we have to go through this first to give you chances to explore how to use the different features of Python. So let us get the input day from our user. So this time we might be getting the pattern here now. We want to ask them for an integer input. I'm going to say, please input a day 1, 2, 3, 6, 5. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to have an if statement. So if input day divided by 7 equals 1, please print it's Monday. Now, what am I going to do? You can see at the top now, I've been asked to input a day from 1 to 365. I'm going to enter 1, and it's printed it's Monday. I'm going to enter 2, and we've got nothing. Well, that's actually to be expected because we haven't told the program what to do if the answer to input day modulus 7 isn't 1. Now, let's try 8. Because as you remember, we were talking about this a minute ago, so If day 1 is a Monday, then day 8, 7 days later, must also be a Monday. And you can see our code has worked again, so that's great. This suggests that this logic is working. Now, I'm next going to do an else statement. Now, basically, what an else statement will be is if the first condition here is not met, or if any number of conditions are met, so in a minute we'll be adding more and more conditions for different days of the week, I'm going to say else print it's not Monday. So now when I go back and type in number 2, we get it's not Monday. When I type in number 3, we also get it's not Monday. If I type in number 1, we get it's Monday. So at least now when we enter in a day that's not a Monday, then at least we can see that the program has worked. Now, what I'm going to do is else if, elif. So this means try this. If that doesn't match, try this. And I'm going to do input day modulus 7 again is equal to 2. And if that's the case, then it is a Tuesday. Now, to save myself time, I'm just going to go through and copy out this statement 7 times. Monday, Tuesday, that'll be Wednesday, that'll be Thursday, that'll be Friday, that'll be Saturday. We need one more. We could actually do it with 6, and we could just say in our else statement, well, if none of those match, then this day that you've put in must be a Sunday. That's all well and good until someone decides to enter a negative number or a string, and then they get told it's a Sunday. So it's better to match each condition to actually kind of explicitly specify each condition, and then have our else statement in this case just be, whoops, there's an error, try entering another date or something like that. The other thing that I haven't covered here that I really should have is when I do an if statement, I have to indent the code inside the if statement. Same with the elif, same with the else. Now this is just because Python will recognise that anything you've indented using the tab key on your keyboard will be part of that statement. So everything, we could run multiple things here and say print, hooray. Again, this will only be run if the input day is a Monday, so I'll just show you that a second. So you can see it's Monday, hooray. If I enter 2 now, we get it's Tuesday. We don't get the hooray. That's because all this indented code belongs to this if statement. Now, let's get rid of hooray because, well, let's pop that down on Saturday and Sunday just because who doesn't love a weekend? And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go Monday, Tuesday. If input day is 3, then it must be Wednesday. Oh, not input day, but if input day modulus 7 is 3, now 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, not 27. Wednesday. I've just pressed Control and Backspace here. This is a nice way to delete a single word. Yeah, very handy. It's Thursday. 5, 5 must be Friday. 6 is Saturday, and 7 is Sunday. And print else, please enter a valid day. So what am I going to do now? I'm going to press play again, and this time I'm going to enter 5. It knows it's Friday. I'm going to enter 12, again 5 plus 7, so it must be another Friday, and that's worked correctly. I'm going to try entering hello, and actually in this case we've just got an error because what we've tried to do is turn the int into a we've tried to turn our input into an integer, and it goes, well, I can't turn hello into an integer, that's not a valid number. Let's see what happens if we enter a negative number. Oh, so that's interesting. Aha, so that's some error that we haven't covered, and we won't do that today. But of course, if we divide a negative number by another number, we still get a remainder. So -3 is Thursday, which probably off the top of my head isn't wrong, but that's outside of the scope of this particular little program. So we could actually also do some other input validation of some kind and say, actually, we'll cover this in a later exercise. If the user enters a negative number, tell them that that's not a valid option and ask them to input another one. But we won't do that today. So what we've got here is a nice little program that will, when given an integer input, output what day of the week that corresponds to, assuming that the day of the week was a Monday. And that's everything for this exercise.